Hey everyone, welcome back to Woodlands Youth 2-Minute Summer Devos. I'm excited to jump in with you this week. We're going to be talking about and thinking about the idea of temptation. So temptation is kind of this big, maybe churchy, biblical word that's used throughout the Bible. But another kind of word that I want to introduce, or two other words that I want to introduce to help us think about this, is the idea of tests and also the idea of a choice. So each of us, we're faced with lots of choices every single day. And the same is true throughout the Bible. Humans are faced with lots of choices, and the chief choice that the Bible is interested in exploring is whether or not humans are going to trust and obey God, or if they're going to trust and obey something or someone else. And that idea of the test, the choice, kind of culminates in who Jesus is, because Jesus is the first person to make all of the right choices, to always trust and obey God. So I'm going to jump in today with a story from Matthew chapter 4. This is a really famous story. It's Jesus being tested in the wilderness. So Jesus has just been baptized by John the Baptist, and what happens is the Spirit leads him into the desert, the wilderness. And it says that the Spirit leads him into the wilderness to be tempted. And he encounters this other prominent character in the Bible, the Satan, the adversary, and he tests him. And he says this to him: "If you are the Son of God, tell these stones to become bread." So Jesus had been in the wilderness for 40 days. He had been fasting. So you can imagine he's incredibly hungry. And Satan tests Jesus and says, "Turn these stones into bread. Fulfill your needs, meet your needs on your own." So Jesus answers and says, "It is written, man shall not live on bread alone, but on every word that comes from the mouth of God." And what Jesus is referencing back to is actually a different story about a test that God's people faced in the Old Testament. And it's when the Israelites were wandering in the wilderness, and they didn't have anything to eat either, and God provided them with bread. It's called manna. Manna from heaven is maybe a phrase that you've heard of. It's from that story. You can go read it. It's in Exodus. But what he's referencing back to is another time in history where God's people had to rely on God to provide for them and meet their needs. So Jesus is saying here, I'm not going to rely on myself to meet my own needs on my terms, but instead I'm going to rely and trust on God to meet exactly what I need on his terms. So one thing I want you to think about, to take away from this, is what choice are you faced in your life where you might be tempted to rely on yourself, to rely on your own ability, power to meet your own needs, whether that's physical, emotional, spiritual. Where are you relying on yourself instead of relying on God? Thanks, and we'll see you tomorrow.